here we go.
Welcome to the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back into the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast. Pat and Scott here at the 9 Route. We're doing our off-season, usual year in review stuff. We obviously, just like the rest of the fantasy football community in the preseason, once the training camps have finished up and everything else, we start to rank the players at their positions for what we think they're going to do for the season. Who's going to be the top quarterback, what rookie's going to stand out, finish better than a seasoned veteran, so on and so forth, and maybe some faces in new places that do work out, don't work out. All that stuff is what we go through. We're going to go back through who we had right, who we had wrong, who we were, close on together, who we were, miles away from on other levels, and, who we got right, who we got wrong, and basically not focusing on the entire list, but some of those players that stand out for certain reasons and our rationale why. How come we were able to find that, pick that diamond in the rough out based on our gut or what we saw coming in with a new offense, or a player that, I'm talking to you, Kyle Pitts, but we're not talking about you, a player that we thought was going to be the world and let you down, and what happened maybe. So we'll touch base on that, give you an idea where we're at. And again, our concepts and our mindset going into the 2023 season. We'll be doing this for real come August into September, when the season's just about to begin, and a lot of these players are locked in. Pat, everything good on your end? I know we're down to part-time in the off season. We're going to have a few different things going on, but always good to have you back and be on here with you.
Yeah, this is like, many of the listeners know that spent many years in the National Guard. This is more like our 1 weekend a month type of thing that we're back to when we're regular season. We're full time. We're going, constantly looking at fantasy football stuff. But now that everything is kind of settled down, I mean, obviously there is, the whole free agent frenzy that's going on right now, which we will eventually get into. I think, obviously there's news every single day that you could talk about. We're not going to get into that today. We're going to do a little bit of review, a little bit of soul searching here, and find out, like you said, what we did right, what we did wrong, and try to figure out what we can learn from our mistakes. I mean, I think that's a big part of just growing as a human being, is making mistakes and learning from them and trying to do better the next time. So hopefully this season we we'll do a little bit better. We'll take some of these lessons that we've learned here today and apply them to our preseason rankings for 2023 and hopefully get a little bit more accurate. And I think that's the goal each year, is to improve. And I think as long as you continue to get better, then you can't really fault yourself for your misgivings. We're all human. We all, make mistakes. We all miss. And, the key is just learning from that, like I said. So I do want to start out by explaining a little bit about how we're going to, I guess, identify some of those players that we hit or missed on. I know that, a lot of fantasy football, websites or, other podcasts or whatever will tend to look at things from an overall season standpoint and just sort of look at, the fantasy finish and sort of not necessarily pay attention to, some of the other factors that may have made, a player a good draft pick or a bad draft pick based on, other factors like points per game, things like that. So what we try to do here is sort of account for both the overall finish and the points per game finish, because fantasy football in general, I mean, most leagues that people are playing in, it's a week by week game. So, a guy may not be a great fantasy producer for an entire season, whether that be due to injury, whether it be because he loses his job as the starter, or, somebody else just plays better, whatever the case is. But these guys can still win you weeks. Case in point, we looked at Derrick Henry last year, played half the season, think he still ended up finishing as like the 8th overall running back or something like that, or the 15th overall running back points wise in fantasy football, having only played half the season. So, another one this year. I think Cooper Kupp played about half the season, ended up finishing 23rd in total points. But that doesn't truly tell the story of 2021 Derrick Henry or 2022 Cooper Kupp, because those guys, while they were playing, were dominating and they were winning you weeks, and may have helped you make a playoff run and win a championship, even though they weren't available to you at the end of the year. So what we do with our adjusted rank or our adjusted finish is we basically just average out the total, the overall points for the season and the points per game. And we give players a ranking based off of how good of a fantasy pick they were, not necessarily how high they finished in total fantasy points. Again, if a guy plays all season, finishes high, Patrick Mahomes, for example, over 500 fantasy points this year. Obviously, the guy was amazing, also led the league in points per game, so he's going to be the number 1 ranked quarterback. But when you take a look at some other guys, you may see somebody like, let's just take Tua, for example. We saw that, he had gotten quite a few concussions this year, did not play all 17 games for Miami, finished as the 13th overall quarterback. But according to our adjusted rank and our adjusted finish, he was the 9th best quarterback because he was 5th in points per game. So the games that he did play, he helped you win those weeks. Unfortunately, he didn't play in all weeks. So, but I don't think that he should necessarily be penalized for an injury that he didn't really have any control over. So we try to keep it as realistic as possible when it comes to these fantasy finishes. And we're going to, as we talk about some of these players that we hit pretty accurately and some that we missed pretty badly on, we'll touch on their adjusted fantasy finish rather than their overall fantasy finish, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's again with the points per game concept, folks. It's a lot of you get that. It's leading you down for seasons at a time to know that yes, somebody, like you said, Pat, somebody gets injured, they miss part or 3/4 of a season. But man, when they were out there, they were producing. If they're in the same offense, perhaps moving forward, that they have the potential to put that kind of point per game average up next year. Some people might pass on somebody like that. Injury scare, or just forget about the player for a few minutes. And that's kind of maybe when you swoop in and end up with a top 5 or a top 10 at a position. Yeah,
that's where I think a lot of value is found in, fantasy football drafts from year to year is, taking into consideration those type of players that were injured or, again, players that may be changing scenery from an offense that maybe wasn't so run heavy or will be more pass heavy this year or whatever the case is. So, obviously all of that will come into play, and we'll get into that in our preseason rankings this coming summer. But as far as the review goes, like I said, we want to make sure that we're giving each player their proper due and giving them the credit for, again, maybe not finishing an entire season as, one of the top few performers at their position. But, if they were a guy who, like you said, we talked about Derrick Henry and Cooper Kupp over the last couple of years. If they were a guy who was completely dominating while they were healthy, they weren't necessarily bad picks. So it's not like we had Cooper Kupp ranked, I believe, our consensus. He was number 2 overall wide receiver this year. I don't think that was a bad pick. Now, his adjusted finish ended up being 10 based off of his total points and his points per game. But I still don't consider, Cooper Kupp a bad pick. He just got unlucky that he missed half of the season. And that's just part of fantasy football from year to year. So not penalizing them, not necessarily trying to penalize us either as guys that we may have gotten wrong, because, if you did draft Cooper Kupp as the first wide receiver off of the board or the second wide receiver off of the board where we had him in our consensus, I don't think he killed you. I mean, he definitely didn't help you win a championship, but he may have gotten you, 6 or 7 wins in the beginning of the season that helped propel you to the playoffs and an eventual championship. So I don't think that they were necessarily bad picks, All right. Well, before we jump into our preseason rankings review, just want to mention our website, www.the9routeffb.com. I am going to post our rankings with all of the information that you're about to hear on our website. You can go on there and check that out if you would like to look at each and every player. We have a nice color-coded graph here to show how close we were or how badly we whiffed on some of these guys. And, I'm going to post that on the website so that our listeners can go on there and check that out if they'd like. If you do have any comments or questions for the show, you can email us at the9routeffb@gmail.com. You can also hit us up on Twitter. We are at the 9route1 and at Scott from Delco. And I think we got a lot to talk about. So let's just jump right into these rankings reviews.
Sounds like a plan, sir. Looks like we're going to start in the quarterback area. So we'll kind of go through these, and then, Pat and I maybe kind of focus on a player or two that kind of stick out for a lot of people that are listening and for us as well. So when we did our rankings for the who we got right, our consensus top 20, for instance, players that, we pretty much were both right there on, give or take, would you say maybe about 3 to 5 spots, maybe you allow for a little variance. And sometimes that's literally 3 and 5 points. So, that kind of plays into it. Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Ryan Tannehill, and Davis Mills, whose days may be numbered, were 4 quarterbacks that Pat, that you and I were pretty close on. And then there were some that you were way more on point than I was. Anybody stick out for you as far as who you got right and I got really wrong?
Not really. I think for me, the quarterback position was a big surprise this year. We're going to talk about some of these guys a little bit later as far as who we missed on, but some of the guys that we expected, I guess. So for me, like a guy like Derek Carr, we had him ranked. I had him at 15. You had him at 10. He finished at 17 in our adjusted finish. So I was fairly close on that. But I was actually surprised. I think even though I had him ranked at 15th, that was more a result of me liking some other guys in front of him a little bit more. But I was actually surprised that Devontae Adams' addition didn't bolt him up into the top 12. And obviously he's now moved on and in New Orleans, and we'll talk about that in a later show. We'll talk about some of the moves that have transpired in the offseason. But I think I was surprised that I was as close as I was with Derek Carr, because I think in the back of my mind, even though I ranked him at 15, sort of expected him to finish a little bit higher with all the weapons he had. Now, Darren Waller was hurt for a lot of the season, and they did rely a lot more on Josh Jacobs than I had anticipated. And I think that's probably, kind of where things evened out for him. But threw a lot of picks this year, and offense just was not as point heavy as they were the year before. So even though I got him right, I was a little disappointed in the fact that I got him right. What about you? Who stuck out for you? I'm sorry. Did you have something to add about Carr?
Real quick. Like, I've always kind of been a little bit into his camp, and I think this was a perfect storm. You have a new coach with a new offense. He's a bit of an aging veteran who was already kind of on his last legs there, and see what they have. And obviously there's been a sea change. Like you said, he's moved on. The Raiders have moved to Jimmy G, who is well-versed in the Josh McDaniel offense. But the Devontae Adams thing, I think, was one where people kind of thought, hey, this should be almost a no-brainer. And for some reason, it just didn't click. So, we'll see what happens. But it was disappointing. I thought he was going to be top 10 potential. Definitely the guy that not that you had him wrong, but that
I was off.
Yes and no. I mean, I say this, we talked about this before the show. Patrick Mahomes, the preseason rankings that you and I made were, I had him as 2 behind Josh Allen. You had him at 8 behind other quarterbacks. No, but again, it wasn't like you had you didn't have Tua up there. You didn't have people just randomly. You had the Kyler Murrays, the Brady's. After our discussion, and again, going back to where like the actual finish, yes, he was number 1 across the board. The differential for me was, for the sake of one place I was light, you were 7. But that we still had him as a top 10 quarterback. And I think everybody, and I even talked myself out of having him on a super flex roster, which came back to bite me in the ass because I talked myself into Justin Herbert, who wasn't horrible, but wasn't healthy at the beginning of the year, got banged up, and it didn't quite pan out. His offense got hurt, like everything just kind of fell apart for him. But we all thought Mahomes maybe was going to lose a step. He had lost Tyreek Hill. They didn't really pick, it's Andy Reid offense. So you don't know. Obviously, Travis Kelce, everybody had him picked to fall off. I mean, he was, he's 30 plus and he's going to fall. Everybody just thought that the Chiefs were done, looking at different things that were factoring in. And here, we just discussed it. He had his second best fantasy football season in his career. Were we expecting him to be able to spread the ball around? You mentioned he had the most completions in his career because, that was the big thing. We watched the Super Bowl. We watched different games throughout the season with Mahomes where he and Andy Reid, which we got to give a lot of credit to both on that they really adjusted the offense to say, all right, just find somebody who's open. Just find somebody who's open. And Mahomes is a little better at that than the average bear to begin with. So once you've tiered the offense to him and his ability and still have that, Travis Kelce's always that ace in the hole who he's going to get the ball. And for the guy to have, like he did in the Super Bowl, to be like 7 for 96 and a touchdown, let alone better once, maybe twice in the season, you're going to see him worse where he's a decoy or he's in blocking. And then they did start to, again, do a little bit of a commitment to see what the running game had for him. Obviously, we unfortunately were on the wrong side of that when it came to, the February matchup. But seeing Mahomes finish where he did, I wasn't surprised in the beginning, but eventually talked myself out. And I think that's probably the more disheartening part, to see him just come back as strong as he did, where, Pat, you weren't alone in that camp. I know a lot of people kind of felt like, he's going to, like, they didn't have him outside the top 10, but they definitely didn't have him as a top 3 choice based on roster changes and the like. So again, I can't say that you were wrong for going the route that you did at all. It just was ironic that, he made everybody shut up.
Yeah, I think the thought process was it wasn't obviously on point, but I think that it was there was some method to the madness. There was some reason for concern with Mahomes, and I forgot that. How could I doubt a guy with a name like Patrick? That's my fault. I should have never done that to begin with.
You really have to look yourself in the mirror.
Yeah. Right. Yeah,
Christ.
Exactly. So I won't do that again. Mahomes will forever be in my top 3 until he retires and comes back, and then retires and comes back, and then retires again. So won't doubt him again for sure. But all right, let's move on to running back. Some of the guys that we both hit on. Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones, James Conner, Leonard Fournette, and Cordero Patterson. We were all, like I said, within 3 or 4 spots of where they finished. And again, this is according to our adjusted finish, not according to their fantasy finish on the year. But I think for a lot of these guys, it was business as usual. They for the most part, most of these players stayed healthy, played most games, and in the games that they did play in, they played to, I think their level of expectation. The guys that we kind of hit on individually, I'll start with my guys, Devin Singletary, Joe Mixon, Breece Hall, Antonio Gibson, and Austin Eckler. I was a little bit closer on Eckler than you were. You doubted him a little bit, not much. You had him at 7. I had him at 4. He obviously finished number 1 overall, had another great season. But the guy that I want to focus on a little bit in this section here is Antonio Gibson. I think coming into this season, we talked about him a lot. Obviously, with the addition of Brian Robinson, there was some skepticism whether Gibson was going to be a 3-down back, whether he was just, going to kind of be relegated to a receiving role, which they had J.D. McKissick for, and then he got hurt. And so it was kind of this weird thing where, I don't even know that Gibson finished, and his adjusted finish, by the way, was number 29, which I had him ranked at 26. You had him up at 17. So, and then there was a whole gunshot thing with Brian Robinson where you were like, oh, man, is he even going to be able to play football this year? And, and Gibson obviously started as the starting running back at the beginning of the season. Robinson eventually sort of became like a 50-50 split in that backfield. And I think all of the doubts that I had with Antonio Gibson, eventually all came to light. I think that I was scared that Robinson was going to take carries, was going to take goal line carries. I was afraid McKissick was going to, eat into any receiving work that Gibson may have had. And I think that, obviously he did a little bit until he got injured. But I think all of the news coming out of Washington and all of the doubt that surrounded Antonio Gibson was warranted, and it it showed in his fantasy finish and in his points per game finish. So was pretty, I don't want to say happy with the fact that I got Gibson right or close to right, but was definitely proud of myself for reading the tea leaves correctly in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, he was a guy who was fielding punts in preseason games, and suddenly, you did give him his due to see that maybe he had a shot, to somehow turn things around. And that Washington team had a lot going on when it came to the running back position in the news.
It seems like when it came to every position, they had a lot going on.
Yeah, quarterback, and we know about those guys. So Pat, you know who I'm going to pick for my running back, right?
Let's go through all the guys that you did get right, because I want to give you all the credit that you deserve before you start drooling all over.
I hope I don't short my microphone out. So it was for James Cook, J.K. Dobbins, Ezekiel Elliott, Dalvin Cook, and one Dameon Pierce. For every Kyle Pitts I drafted, I had a Dameon Pierce to validate my reality. And again, like the guy didn't, finish top 5 in the league. No, but he was a really good young player on a really bad team. And that's not, Houston Texans. We all know what kind of a mess they were. They weren't a sustainable offense. I actually have a rebuild league in Sleeper where I pretty much had a decent chunk of that offense to kind of help me tank with multiple draft picks. I'm interested to see how that works out. Pierce, came in with a lot of hype out of college that he was really going to be a good running back coming out of the University of Florida. Hadn't had tons of usage, but was highly skilled, a little bit more of an in-between the tackles runner. Not than a pass catcher, so to speak. But the last guy that I really remember was, and we had a couple, was Fred Taylor and Emmitt Smith, where you had these running backs who really can kind of take over games at times. And, he being of that pedigree from that school. Okay. I don't follow a lot of college football, but listening to some of the people that are in our leagues talk about it a little bit. So, did some research and I thought he had a shot, and he did really play well. Got a little banged up near the end of the year, which a lot of rookies can do. Some got banged up earlier in the year. At the same time, I think it's kind of like an onward and upward for him. And, he got some usage this season, yes. Now, we just saw today that Devin Singletary just got signed to a 1-year deal in Houston, a 1-year prove-it deal. They've added Dalton Schultz. They've traded Brandon Cooks. They're in line to draft a quarterback. They have some money to do some things. Are they going to be a division winner? I don't think so. But I think Dameon Pierce, if they can help that, beef that offensive line a little bit up. Laremy Tunsil is a good tackle, but I think across the board, if they strengthen that and they have a competent offense, Davis Mills kind of plateaued and fell to the point where Kyle Allen was playing a lot. And again, that's why they're looking for a quarterback. But Dameon Pierce for me was a guy that I kind of had my wagon circled around and really hoped that was going to be what we thought. And for the most part, he was. You saw some action in the preseason, and then you saw a couple of veteran running backs that were going to be, oh, no, we're going to play them first. And it took about a half a game for people, even the head coach, to say, nah, I got to play this guy. So hats off to Lovie Smith for that. And again, I'm looking forward to having him in my dynasty leagues. He is available if anybody's interested. But at the end of the day, it was definitely one of the few good calls that I did have last year when it came to being able to kind of have an idea where he was going to be and probably finish compared to a lot of the other players and rookies in the league.
Yeah, you actually, as far as his overall fantasy finish, total points, you were actually dead on. You had him at 27. He finished at 27. As far as our adjusted finish ranking, he actually was bumped up to number 23 because he finished the number 21 running back in points per game. So even as far as the adjusted rank goes, even you, who was, were a lot higher on him, was even 4 spots too low. So he definitely was impressive this year, and definitely a guy who, if they, like you said, if the Texans can, put together a half decent offense, they weren't terrible defensively. He scored a bunch of touchdowns this year. And I think if their offense can sort of, get things turned around a little bit, he could potentially, be one of those 12 to 14 touchdown guys next year as well. So absolutely a great dynasty pick. Hopefully, if you do sell him, you're getting a premium for him, because he's definitely looks like he's going to be a good running back for the next few years to come, at least.
Yeah, number 1 picks only, please. Don't insult me. Thank you. So now we're going to move on to wide receiver, right?
Let's do it.
Top 50 consensus. We were both in simpatico form with obviously Justin Jefferson, Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, Devontae Adams, C.D. Lamb, Jerry Jeudy, and Jamar Chase. A lot of familiar names there. It was kind of hard to miss really on some of those guys, but when it came to my end on the wide receiver tip, I had DK Metcalf, I had Scared Terry McLaurin, and DJ Moore, who was of the Carolina Panthers. But hey, folks, in case you haven't been paying attention, is now a Chicago Bear after the number 1 pick was exchanged and that mega deal finally went the way it should have. My guy for it's going to be an interesting time, I think, down there. So my guy that I think was somebody who, and I did this for a couple reasons, was DK Metcalf. I thought Geno Smith was going to be a decent, competent quarterback. He showed signs of life when he was filling in for Russ. Obviously, the big trade happened with Denver. They gave him the keys to the offense. And the way that Pete Carroll seemed to have that confidence, yes, he said it was an open, Drew Lock and he would be, going back and forth and all. You're not going to do that. I think that Geno Smith was competent, and I think we saw in those games that he did play in 2021, that when he did play with Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf was a little bit more of his weapon of choice. Lockett had always kind of been a darling of Russ. And then eventually through the season, they seemed to split almost points and almost finish around the same spot, which they kind of did last year too, or this past season. But, Metcalf being the kind of alpha receiver in an offense that you figured he was going to become this top 5 wide receiver and then seemed to fall off. Now, I wasn't as high on him when we first started our program, and then kind of watched him, really said, okay, you know what, he's probably going to be able to put it together pretty well. Yes, he did not have a top 25 season, so to speak, in certain ways, but in our adjusted finish, he ended up being number 19, which I actually had him picked 19. Pat, you had 23. You weren't far off either. Again, we were right there on him, figuring he was pretty much going to be a top 20 wide receiver. And there had been some talk in training camp that he was disgruntled and may get traded. I know we had our antenna up with the Eagles and different things like that. Different teams, you never knew what was going to happen, but ended up putting together a pretty solid season for Seattle, and they actually did exceed a lot of expectations considering the Russell Wilson draft. So DK Metcalf was one guy that I kind of changed my tune on and felt like, okay, you know what? I think this guy is really going to be a stud, more so now than ever. And he really has. He's proven that to the point now where Geno Smith has a nice deal sticking around for a couple more years with Seattle. And again, Metcalf proven that he's a top 20 wide receiver and has potential for more.
Yeah, that guy's just a beast. And, it goes to show that not that wide receivers are quarterback proof, because they're not, but the truly talented ones are going to get theirs regardless. And DK is one of those guys who is one of the alpha dogs, like you said, in the NFL. He's too hard to cover. And then I could probably complete some passes to him, and I have a noodle arm. So I think he's a mainstay in the top 20 for sure. The guy that I want to talk about real quick. Let me go over who I got right. I hit on Adam Thielen. felt the fall off coming there, and had him pretty
Wide
close
receiver
to
one now in Carolina.
yeah, for now.
Yeah.
Give him a month. Juju Smith-Schuster I hit, and AJ Brown. Brown, I think everybody kind of had Brown up there as far as one of those guys who was going to benefit from the change of scenery. But I want to talk a little bit about Juju. I had him ranked at 28th. He finished at 27th overall. In our adjusted rank, finished at number 31. And I think that there was a lot of talk about who was going to be the wide receiver one, or I guess the wide receiver one after Travis Kelce in Kansas City, because I think we all knew that he was going to be the main target there. And even though Juju finished higher than any of the other Kansas City wide receivers, there still was this whole, spread the ball around type thing that was going on in Kansas City. And I am, Scott, you were close on him too. I think you had him a little bit higher at 24.
Somebody was going to have to catch the ball. I mean, we were kind of figuring that.
Yeah, absolutely. And he did a good job. And I think that he was serviceable for what they needed him for. Obviously not serviceable enough to re-sign because he's now a New England Patriot. But I think that, again, the concern around all of the Chiefs wide receivers was not really knowing who the alpha was in that offense behind Travis Kelce, and who, I think all the wide receivers were sort of just tight end twos for that team. That seemed to kind of be how that worked. And I was shocked, and I guess, a little proud that I had called Smith-Schuster in the proper neighborhood, because I had seen him in the preseason. Some people had him up as high as inside the top 20, and some people had him down, in the 40s, 50s. And so I think, where he finished and what he provided to that team was about what I expected from him. And I was happy moving forward with that. So definitely a good call on my part there. Let's move into the tight end position. We definitely want to move through these a little bit quickly so we can get to the guys that we got wrong. Those are kind of the guys we want to hit on a little bit more. But at the tight end position, Scott and I both basically nailed Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Mark Andrews, Dalton Schultz, Noah Fant, and Hayden Hurst. Those are the guys that were, like I said, within 2 or 3 rankings of where they actually finished according to our adjusted ranks. The guys that I got right individually were Gerald Everett, Cole Kmet, and TJ Hawkinson. And just want to touch on Gerald Everett real quick. I think that he's always been known around the league as a very athletic, pass-catching type tight end, not really known for his blocking, more for his route running in his hands. And I think a lot of his success this year came from injury to other players. Keenan Allen missed a handful of games. Mike Williams missed a handful of games. Josh Palmer ended up being the number one receiver on that team for a few games this season. So I think Everett, sort of out of necessity, became the guy. And I think that he proved that when given the opportunity and given some targets, he can absolutely produce. And I think that, moving forward, wherever he plays, I think that he's a guy that you could absolutely look at as a sleeper tight end. And so I think, he's a guy that I had on plenty of my teams this year, because I did think that there was a potential for him. And he realized that potential in quite a few different games, and definitely helped me in a few of my leagues win some games and get into some playoffs. So, Scott, you had the guys that you had correct that I was a little off on. You had Pat Freiermuth, Mo Alley Cox, and Kyle Rudolph. Of course, you got that one right.
I mean, come on.
Your old cousin Kyle there.
Hey, yes.
Who was your the guy you're kind of most proud of making the call in the tight end position?
I mean, I really do. I value tight end like obsessively way more than probably most people should. But kind of just looking at that offense, what Pittsburgh was going to have post Big Ben. I also had Najee Harris tipped for 2,000 yards on purpose. Mind you, that did not happen. No, he rebounded at the end of the season, but beginning of the year, I think that Liz Frank thing was way more legit than they wanted to let on. The offensive line, mud. Quarterback, mud. Yeah, you finally got the Kenny Pickett, but that he was going to be a guy that was going to be truly pound for pound a safety valve, what have you.
A necessary option for them, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he finished top 50 in the league in receptions, not so much with touchdowns and things like that, but he definitely was a guy that was trying to help move the chains. He had almost 40 first downs throughout the season. And I mean, these are things that, double-digit average in yards per catch. He had 11.6 yards a catch. So, again, anything that they were doing to move the football, it was kind of running through him. We noticed Deontay Johnson kind of fall off. We did see the emergence of George Pickens in that offense, and Kenny Pickett start to kind of come around a little bit. Again, mixed bag when you have a bad O-line and you're kind of getting thrust into things. But yeah, Freiermuth, I thought, obviously it had a lot of potential and looked pretty good with Big Ben. I think some people thought there was going to be, so much to say a fall off, or that, again, just like I did, that Harris would be so involved in the offense that, not that he'd be an afterthought, but between that and the O-line being bad, that he was just going to kind of help stay in and block a little bit more. Like you did see, for instance, albeit because of Tyreek Hill, but you saw a much muted output, which, we'll get into with like Mike Gesicki with Miami. And that's kind of what happened with him, was that, he was playing on franchise tag. It was kind of like an awkward situation with him down there, but that they just kind of used him to help the O-line out and, kind of run a little diffusion plays and stuff like that. Like he really wasn't involved in the offense, versus Freiermuth, who was one of the better players on that team, on that roster overall. At the end of the day, when you go back and look through, obviously Deontay Johnson was the leading receiver, but he was second on the team in reception. So obviously that a little bit goes a long way. And I was not surprised, but I was actually a little bit more surprised at how much he did get used compared to my running back. Boo-hoo, me.
Well, we're about to get into the guys we got wrong now. So we'll save the Najee Harris talk for that part of the show. We'll start at the quarterback position like we did for the guys we got right. So here's some guys that Scott and I both kind of missed on for various reasons, and then we'll kind of go into, again, our individual picks and who we got wrong. Kyler Murray, we missed on Marcus Mariota, Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields, Jared Goff, Aaron Rodgers, Tua Tagovailoa, Geno Smith, and Daniel Jones. Now, some of these guys we missed on because we had them ranked high and they didn't finish there. And some of these guys we had ranked much lower than where they finished. And I think that for me personally, the two guys that I want to highlight a little bit out of this group are Justin Fields and Daniel Jones. And I think that for as much as we didn't know how good of passers, of pocket passers these two guys could be, I think we forgot, or I definitely forgot, how important mobility is for quarterback. And I think that, when it comes to fantasy football, if you're going to be the type of fantasy football manager that waits on a quarterback, I think you absolutely have to look at one of these guys who can add something with their legs when it comes to fantasy football, because it literally is a cheat code to have a quarterback that is going to put up, 40 to 50 rushing yards a game and, potentially, a touchdown. Even if one touchdown every 3 games, you average 2 extra points just on rushing touchdowns, combined with 40 or 50 yards. I mean, you're talking about 6 or 7 points every week. And quarterbacks, even some of the guys in the top 10 of quarterback points per game finishes are still finishing, they're around 20 points. So we're looking at Trevor Lawrence, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Geno Smith, all these guys, just around 20 points per game. If you can get 7 out of your quarterback with just their legs, you're cheating. I mean, you're basically adding, like almost another sort of running back to your roster. So I think moving into next year, I am going to bump up all of these quarterbacks to have a little bit more rushing ability, give them a few more spots in my rankings. And that's one of the takeaways for me from who we got wrong this year as a group. As far as who I got wrong individually, we talked about Mahomes already. And real quick, just want to touch on Russell Wilson. I'm still not out on Russ. I think that there is a potential that with Sean Payton there in Denver, he could absolutely have a great year next year. I'm a little more, scared to maybe put my money where my mouth is and pick him in some leagues. But I do think a lot of what happened was just him not being in the right offense. I mean, if you saw what Geno Smith did in Seattle, it was obvious that what was going on in Denver wasn't working. And, obviously the ownership saw that and, fired the head coach, I think the day after Christmas or the day before Christmas or something. I know it was right around Christmas, which was terrible. But I don't think that Russ is completely cooked yet. I still think that he potentially has some – has a couple of good years in him. And I think that if you're in a dynasty league, you can probably trade for Russ real cheap right now. And you could potentially have yourself a, top 5, top 6 quarterback over the next season or so, depending on, what Sean Payton brings to that offense in Denver. Scott, the guys that you really, really missed on, Deshaun Watson and Kenny Pickett, not so many for you there, but any of those guys you want to talk about particularly?
Just real quick. I mean, Deshaun Watson, I wouldn't have had him ranked high. I mean, I had Jacoby Brissett as the number 32. My big thing was figuring that Watson would not play for the entire season more than anything. And that that was really it. Even if he came back, like he did, he wasn't productive enough to be, worthy of first round picks. And, some people were just waiting for him to come back and be, Houston Texans 12-4, Deshaun Watson playoff quarterback type stuff. But no, my biggest thing, I had him so far out. I had him ranked at the bottom of our list, basically not ranked because I just didn't think he was going to play. And I was a little surprised that, he did come back, and the irony that he comes back against Houston, I can't imagine the NFL would do anything like that on purpose.
But, some weird 11-game suspension.
Yeah, just random numbers. Yeah, because why not? But no, that was really it for me. So then moving on to our consensus top 50 running backs.
We blew this year. Yeah, this is a tough list, man. Looking at it, I'm a little upset.
It was, and like you said at the top, it's like, yes, did we miss by a few on some of these guys? Sure. Did we miss by a lot on a few of these guys? Yeah, we did. But a lot of them are kind of like right in our wheelhouse of being within a few. Like you say, if I'm a 1 off and you're 7 off, I think we're still in a good spot. It's not, somebody was off by 20. It's like, what were you thinking? Oh my God. Like, that's a whole different story, when it comes down to it. So our guys, Jeff Wilson Jr., Jonathan Taylor, obviously there's some injury factors to go there. Tony Pollard, Cam Akers, Kenneth Walker III, Josh Jacobs, Raheem Mostert, A.J. Dillon, Najee Harris, and Jamal Williams. Yes, Mr. Touchdown, Mr. 1-yard scorer, Jamal Williams. So with my guys that I missed on, I was a little bit too high on or too low on. David Montgomery, I was a little too high on. Saquon Barkley, I was too low on. I was very surprised he came back and started out like gangbusters, leveled off a little bit, but stayed healthy and stayed effective. Antonio Gibson, again, when you're catching punch, I think you're catching a bus, and that didn't happen. But the guy that really kind of I just didn't see it happening this season was Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars, where you were way closer. You saw this pretty much happening, where some kind of timeshare that was going to give him the ability to do this, let alone the reunited with his college quarterback in Trevor Lawrence. But coming off of that list, Frank, not thinking that maybe he was going to be healthy enough, and that James Robinson was, albeit coming off an Achilles, but that he had been a productive running back for that team. And, the season started, and for the sake of a game and, preseason hype, you're still saying, okay, new coach though with Doug Peterson taking over. And Etienne just shifted gears, took off just like he did on the field, and didn't really stop. I mean, had pretty much a solid season the entire season, finished with about 13 points per game once he got going, and, after the first couple of weeks, and really put a big surprise on a lot of people's faces that weren't expecting him. Some people were already on his bus following him around. He finished with over 200 points for the season. Our adjusted rank was 20. His actual finish was 17, But on that level, like you're right where you need to be with that. He's a top 20 talent, and I think he showed it. I think that offense as a whole had a lot of surprises to the point where, they gave it a hero's effort against Kansas City in the playoffs, but couldn't quite get past that. But throughout the regular season, making the playoffs and being a team that looks like a very young and up and coming team, he's going to be a big part of that, Travis Etienne. And again, I was wrong. I didn't see it happen in this season. Maybe a little timeshare, and then they move off of the veteran because of his overall skill set. But the fact that he was able to take it over after a couple of weeks into the season, I was a little surprised. And again, he did not let go and looked very good. He looks very promising for the future for that team.
Yeah, had that big carry in their playoff win as well, to that fourth down carry to seal the deal there against the Chargers. The two guys that I want to touch on real quick, one was a guy that we both sort of missed on, which was Josh Jacobs, and then a guy that you were much closer on than I was, Miles Sanders in Philadelphia. Both of these guys definitely got a lot more usage than I expected. With Jacobs, I thought the addition of Devontae Adams was going to, sort of have the Raiders, leaning more on their passing offense. And I think, maybe the subpar play of Derek Carr, may have had something to do with that, or maybe the fact that Jacobs just was absolutely killing it every time he touched the ball gave, Josh McDaniels the green light to just hand it to him, many more times. And that's just sort of, when something's working, you just stick with it. With Miles Sanders, I thought it was going to be a little bit more of a timeshare. I was also a little bit worried about the Jalen Hurts, stealing a lot of rushing touchdowns, which he did have, quite a few of this year, double-digit rushing touchdowns for Hurts. And with Miles Sanders not having any rushing touchdowns in 2021, I was a little concerned that, maybe the Philadelphia was going to look to split that backfield up a little bit more, being an Eagles fan and, kind of having my finger, what I thought was my finger on the pulse a little bit. It definitely seemed like coming out of training camp or going into training camp, there was a lot more buzz around Kenneth Gainwell in Philadelphia. Boston Scott has always been there doing his thing, but I really thought that Gainwell was going to jump into a more prominent role and get a little bit closer to a 50-50 split with Sanders. That did not happen. Sanders led the team in carries, led the team in touchdowns, yards, basically every running back stat for Philadelphia. And Philadelphia was, one of the top 3 rushing offenses in the league. So, I definitely punted on that one there and, missed the Sanders train. There was actually one of the drafts that I was in, one of the guys in my league, we have to keep 2 players, and Miles Sanders was one of his keepers, and he got made fun of pretty hard at the draft for keeping Miles Sanders. And he's like, it's fine. You guys can laugh now. He's like, but you watch, you'll be trying to trade for him in the middle of the season. And sure enough, he was getting offers and Sanders was killing it. He ended up finishing number 18 in our adjusted finish, number 15 overall. And even you had him ranked higher than I did, and you were still off by a few spots there. So Sanders definitely, sort of step back up and, prove that he can still, he's still a talented running back. He always was. I think, the lack of touchdowns in 2021 sort of soured a lot of people, including myself, on what his potential was for 2022. Okay. Yeah, let's move on to the wide receivers.
All right. So it's a big list, folks. We'll try to fire through it real quick.
The guys we missed on. So wide receivers is different, a little bit different. And I just want to put this out there. We missed on a lot of wide receivers because wide receivers are the most volatile position in fantasy football. You have the highest highs and the lowest lows with a lot of these guys. And when Scott goes and reads off the names, you're going to see a lot of people in the fantasy football industry missed on a lot of these guys, just based off of situation. Some of them have to do with injury, but wide receiver is a tough position to pick correctly because with running backs, you kind of know who the starters are and where the timeshares are. With wide receivers, man, you have no idea. Other than, some of those top guys who we did hit, like Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp, guys like that. When you start getting into number 2 and number 3 wide receivers, you just don't know. So this list is going to be a little large.
Okay, so keeping it friendly for the kids, let's move into the wide receivers that we missed on. Starting off with Mac Hollins, Allen Robinson, Zay Jones, Darius Slayton, Rashad Bateman, Elijah Moore, Hunter Renfro, Traylon Burks, Darnell Mooney, Michael Thomas, Tyler Lockett, Robert Woods, Joshua Palmer, Devonta Smith, Garrett Wilson, Mecole Hardman, Courtland Sutton, Deontay Johnson, Brandon Cooks, Hollywood Brown, Curtis Samuel, and finally Brandon Ayuk. Man, if that isn't a list, Jesus. The only one I say for me, just real quick, I did not rank Michael Thomas last season because I did not expect him to play. Pat, I know you had him at 20. You had him preseason wise, you had him at 26. So there's some big swings on our level, but that was my big thing. I just didn't have him. I just didn't have him ranked. I didn't think he was going to play, considering the. And they re-signed him again. I think, guys. I don't even know what the hell you're going down there, but the actual the guys that I missed on that were a little off was both Christian Watson and DeAndre Hopkins. And the one I want to focus on is the rookie Christian Watson. With him, he was injured in training camp, was missing time, and I bought into the Aaron Rodgers being all about, and reading some of the press stuff too, with Romeo Doubs, the other rookie wide receiver that they drafted. I had Christian Watson preseason picked at 80, figuring he was going to have trouble getting on the field, and that even when he did sort of play, he didn't look good. He didn't seem healthy. Coming from North Dakota State, we were a little shell-shocked with injuries in North Dakota State alums here in the Philadelphia region. That being said, he did start out very, very, very slow. And then about almost a little over the halfway point, I'd say about 2/3 of the way through the season, started to play, got healthy, and was getting 3-4 touchdown games out of it. It's like, come on, you got to be kidding me. This guy is just like crushing it, to the tune of, in a smaller sample size after he got healthy, finished with 12 plus points a game PPR for a top 40 finish with our adjusted rank at 37. So I was way off the mark, closing in on 50 spots different. Pat, you were way closer with about 15. You saw that, he was going to get into that Aaron Rodgers offense. My thing is, I just will never trust Aaron Rodgers again. I am not going near the New York Jets this season. You can have your dark room, do what you got to do. But Christian Watson, I did miss the boat on. Was able to pick him up in a late season trade as a throw-in the week before he went off, and everybody was like, "Oh, come on!" I'm like, "Thank you very much." So, again, does he do that with Jordan Love or a quarterback to be? We'll see.
Yeah, I think I fell in love with his numbers at the combine, and I think that's sort of why I had a little bit more faith in him. He was just a really, really tall, fast, athletic guy. So I did think that given the opportunity, yeah, I know. Darn. All right, so the guys that I missed on, I guess more big time than Scott: KJ Osborne, Paris Campbell, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Chris Olave. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Amon-Ra St. Brown just because I need to hand it to Scott. He called this one. He actually wasn't even as high on Amon-Ra as he finished. He finished number 7 overall, number 8 in our adjusted finish. I had him all the way down at 32. I wasn't a huge. Didn't think the Detroit offense was going to be as good as it was, and it was way better than I had ever expected it to be. But I also didn't think that St. Brown was going to be as big of a part. I know that he had that fantastic finish at the end of the 2021 season, but I had kind of chalked that up to him really being the only healthy pass catcher option for the Detroit Lions. And I thought that with the addition of G.J. Chark, with DeAndre Swift hopefully being healthy and catching some passes out of the backfield, I thought that the targets were going to drop and the receptions and all that good stuff. And I was wrong. I mean, he ended the year with 149 targets, 146 targets, over 100 receptions for 1,100 yards. And, just proves that, that chip that he has on his shoulder is rather large. And he's a guy, like I said, that I will, I'm not going to doubt again moving into next year. I think that he's proven that, when he said that he gets up for games against the wide receivers that were drafted ahead of him, he means it. And he's the type of guy who definitely, like I said, plays with the chip on his shoulder, and I think is going to be a very good wide receiver. I'm interested in seeing how a healthy Jameson Williams potentially cuts into his workload moving forward. But I mean, you can't argue with results, and he put up the numbers this year and continued basically on the pace that he was on for the end of the 2021 season. So hats off to you for being higher on him, and you definitely were right on that one.
I mean, I had him on my roster, which kind of helped in 2021, and the finish that he had, and actually being able to reap victories off of that. And for some people to say it was flash in the pan stuff, but I mean, it didn't seem that way. It seemed like, this guy finally had a shot. And like you said, he's got the confidence, not cocky, but he's a very confident player in his abilities to finish, as a top 10 wide receiver, albeit, adjusted ranks and whatnot. So I did see maybe a little bit of fall off. Yeah. Once different pieces started, DJ Chark was there on a 1 year prove it. Maybe he would cut into it, but yeah, this guy seemed to be the top guy, and the offense really seemed to kind of go through him. And obviously we saw Jared Goff finally look like a legit quarterback, not just a game manager, because of that offense. And he was a big part of it. And I think we're going to wrap up real quick with our tight end position. Pat, you want to fire this one?
Sure. So the guys that we both missed on pretty badly, that everybody missed on, Kyle Pitts. We also got wrong Juwan Johnson from the Saints, Darren Waller, Hunter Henry, Evan Ingram, Taysom Hill, Tyler Higbee, and Tyler Conklin for the Jets. I think with some of these guys, Pitts was just, Atlanta's offense was not as pass heavy as we had hoped, and all the passes that they did throw seemed to be going towards Drake London. So Pitts just had a very disappointing year. Still think that there's some light at the end of the tunnel for him. I do believe that his physical talents will eventually shine through when he gets an opportunity to play in a more quarterback centric offense. As far as some of the other guys on this list, like Darren Waller was injured, Evan Ingram, not many people saw that coming. Maybe we should have in a Doug Peterson offense who loves to utilize the tight end position. But as far as Taysom Hill goes, I think Hill's always one of those guys where you can take a shot on him because of his unique skill set. He's going to score you points in different ways. And I think that even though he didn't necessarily finish super high, even in our adjusted ranks, he finished at number 9. He's, like I said, he's a guy who can score you points in a ton of different ways. And he's a guy that, in these weird situations where, quarterbacks get injured or, the team wants to mix things up a little bit. He can have some of these really big games that he had, this past season. Another guy who kind of disappointed me individually, Irv Smith Jr., and a guy that I'm going to talk about real quick, Austin Hooper. I really, for me, it wasn't just Austin Hooper. It was Treylon Burks. It was Robert Woods. It was basically anybody who caught passes in that Tennessee offense. That Derrick Henry is going to be the guy, and he's going to, obviously be the main piece of that offense. But I really just had a little bit more faith in Ryan Tannehill and Mike Vrabel, and I thought that Tennessee coming out of 2021 being the number 1 seed in the AFC, that their offense was going to continue to click even without A.J. Brown. Obviously, Treylon Burks is no A.J. Brown, at least not at this point in his career. But I was surprised to see how much A.J. Brown was missed in that offense and how it completely changed what the Tennessee Titans were able to do on offense. And, I thought, Hooper had a chance to pick up some of the targets that Brown was vacating, and that didn't happen. And it just seemed like the Titans just sort of, in a lot of games just decided to just not throw the ball as much as, you'd like to see if you are a fantasy manager with any of their pass catchers on your team. So a little disappointed in Hooper. Still think he's a good player, but the situation for him this year, sort of like you talked about earlier with Mike Gesicki, just wasn't a good situation, and definitely got that one wrong this year.
Yeah. My guys, Cole Kmet, TJ Hawkinson, and Mike Gesicki, God rest his soul, who is now a New England Patriot. Speaking of guys that made moves at the tight end position, with TJ Hawkinson, I've always been – I had him 1 year, and then the injuries kind of bit me, and I've always been a little hesitant on guys with can't play whole season, injured, banged up, yada, yada. This season, he started out doing some interesting things, to say the least. Had a couple meh games, and then week 4 against New Orleans goes off for 41 points in our league of record. And then, starts to get a little dinged up after that. And then you turn around and he gets traded on November 1st to division rival leader, the Minnesota Vikings. And then now with, I guess to say a bigger role, so to speak, puts up pretty solid numbers through the season, has a monster game against the New York Giants for 37, almost 38 points in our league of record. Both of those big barn burner games, over 100 yards, 2 touchdowns in both. I never saw that coming. And I think that helped to push some of his points per game and stuff like that over the hump in an offense that was terrific. It was the defense that was the Vikings' Achilles heel. But Hawkinson, for me, that was always that he just couldn't stay healthy and struggled in a Detroit offense that wasn't great. At some points, he was the focal point. And then with Amon-Ra St. Brown and with, the 1-2 punch that was for a little bit, 1-2 punch of DeAndre Swift, and then eventually was the Jamal Williams show. And then they draft Jamison Williams, where he was going to probably get phased out to an extent, unless, based on rookie contracts and stuff. But the fact that they made the trade that they did, shipped him off, and then he goes into another offense that's bigger and brighter than anything you would have expected. Yeah, I did not expect that. I had him outside the top 10, figuring on the injuries. Yes, he did miss a couple games, but those 2 monster games alone of, again, you're talking about if your tight end puts up 42 and 38. So we're talking what, 80
points. Mm-hmm.
80 points in 2 games for a tight end. Darren Waller, injured this season, put up 84, almost 85 points. So, I mean, if that gives you any idea, the types of quarterbacks that basically 2 games of his beat out most at the position. And that's going to happen because the tight end position there's the haves and there's the have-nots. And it's, it used to be 1 or 2 or 3 guys. Now it's creeping into a 7, 8, 9, 10. And then you'd start to see a little bit of a fall off. But as the passing game is just becoming and has become the biggest thing in the league, that the tight end position is just that, from a grunty blocker who occasionally could be athletic enough to get open, to the point now where it's quietly just that, hey, he's a big wide receiver. Nobody can touch the guy. And Hawkinson looks like that kind of a player.
Yeah, I think you were talking about Hawkinson getting phased out. I mean, he obviously they were thinking about and wanting to move on from him to the point where they phased him right out of the team completely and traded him. So, I do still think he's a talented guy. I think he was drafted, number 8 overall, which, is incredibly high spot to take a tight end in the NFL draft. So the talent is there. I think that moving forward, I think he's got a chance to stay in the top 8 or so in the at the tight end position. But you can't really compete with 2 monster games like that, and that accounting for a third of your fantasy points for the season. All right, well, I think that is going to do it. I know that that took a little bit longer than we expected, and that's fine. We'll cut and then edit and make this consumable for people.
Content, baby. We could split this over 2. We should split it. Let's do
All the haves, all the have-nots.
Yeah, the ups and downs of our preseason prognostications.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of work. So we'll see how that goes. Before we sign off, we do want to say thank you to Mickey's Pub in Tuckerton, New Jersey, for partnering with the show. If you are looking for a great place to hang out, watch some sports, Mickey's is it. Great food, drink specials, and all the football you can handle. Mickey's Pub, 327 East Main Street in Tuckerton, New Jersey, where friends and family meet. And before we go, we also want to let you know about our upcoming shows. Like Scott said earlier, we are down to one show per month in the off season. We are going to dive into our rookie preview coming up right before the NFL draft. And then we are going to do another NFL mock draft head to head. Scott would not let me pay off my bet from last year for whatever strange reason, but I still
building up interest.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's gonna be a keg by next season.
Hell yeah, brother!
But yeah, we'll get into that. We'll do another head-to-head mock draft and take a look at some fantasy relevant rookies. At the four major positions coming in, and talk about some guys that we like, and maybe guys that we don't like, and do the whole rookie thing for all the dynasty players out there, and the the people obviously who are going to be drafting rookies in next year's redraft leagues as well. So look forward to that coming up in about a month or so. Check our website for release dates for our podcast. Once we figure out exactly when we're recording and when we're going to release those episodes, we do get them up on the website as quickly as possible. Also, don't forget, if you are listening on Apple or Google, hit the little plus button for us to follow the show. It greatly helps us continue to do what we do here at the 9 Route. Also, if you are watching or listening on the YouTube, hit that subscribe button and that notification. Again, that gives us a huge boost when it comes to other people seeing our content, and also as far as potential bigger audience for us to talk about fantasy football with. So please do that for us. Again, don't forget to check out our website, www.the9routeffb.com, and hit us up on the Twitter machine at the 9route1 and at Scott from Delco. Scott, any parting words before we head out for this month?
Like and subscribe, bitches. Peace.